For reasons I've never understood, people like to hear that the world is going to hell. Historian Deidre McCloskey. So, thinking about this quote and thinking about a topic for this episode, it's really interesting. 2 years ago, I'm seeing memories from 2 years ago on my social medias and things like social medias, I don't know. Anyway, seeing memories about what was going on 2 years ago in the markets, and we're coming up on, exactly 2 years from that coronavirus bottom, and just reading different tweets and referring back to different things. And there's a book that I tell a lot of, or mention that it would be helpful for a lot of people, clients, friends, etc., to read, and it's The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And there's a chapter in there about pessimism versus optimism. Well, there's actually a chapter about optimism as well, but it just talks about good outcomes versus bad outcomes, and what actually comes to fruition. And it's just really interesting because you see a lot of pundits on TV talking about when is the bottom going to happen. I think there, they might say something like they think there's more volatility that will happen, or there's, this correction's not over, or something like that, obviously quoting them. But it's interesting because if you have someone on there that's optimistic, it just gets written off. It's like, yeah, but what about this or what about that? It's easier to come up with stories of doom and gloom. So I'm going to read through just a couple of quotes throughout this episode from that chapter in The Psychology of Money and just talk about them a little bit. So an interesting one to start with is thinking about the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and the Wall Street Journal actually published a story that says this, and I'm going to quote this. Around the end of June 2010 or early July, says this economic professor, actually. It says the U.S. will break into 6 pieces. Alaska going to Russia. California will form the nucleus of what he calls the Californian Republic and will be part of China. Texas will be part of Mexico. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here just for sake of time. Washington, D.C. and New York will be part of the, quote, Atlantic America. And then they might join the European Union. The Midwest will effectively become Canada. Hawaii will be part of Asia, etc., etc. And so it's really interesting because that was published in the Wall Street Journal, which is one of the most, if not the most prestigious publications for finance that exists today. And it was from a prestigious economist too. I think he actually happened to be from Russia, obviously. When I released this episode, thinking about people in Ukraine and the Russian invasion there. But anyway, it was not just, a blog online. So it's really interesting, and just someone that could be that pessimistic, right? When it's actually occurring, when things are actually happening, people are super quick to jump to the pessimistic philosophies because they feel like they're logically correct, even though in reality things don't necessarily pan out that way. So just thinking through different things and different ideas that people might have. Another quote from this, it says, if a smart person tells me they have a stock pick that's going to rise tenfold in the next year, I immediately write them off as full of nonsense. However, if someone who is full of nonsense tells me a stock I own is about to collapse, I will clear my calendar and listen to their every word. And I think that's so true. And it's really tough, right? When I get calls from clients, and right now the market is obviously down on the year for 2022. So I remember, even just this week, I had a client that says, I can't even look at my account. And they're, down maybe 5 or 6% on the year, where the market is down 10 or 12. And I'm like, well, if you think about it, you're actually beating the market. You're actually crushing the market. And as far as, losing less than the market. Now, that said, she's not taking out the money in the next couple of years anyway, so it doesn't necessarily affect her today, but mentally and psychologically it absolutely does affect her. And part of the reason why, right? So part of this episode, I want to talk about why the pessimistic news hits home or is focused on more than the optimistic news. And part of that is because, and this is from Daniel Kahneman's research, that a loss feels 2 to 4 times worse than a gain feels good inside of an account. So the past few years are a great example. I feel like and I've done a previous episode on this, the mindset shift, like the past few years in the market has been double-digit positive returns, and people are like, oh, great, this is the new normal. It's just going to do this forever. And now this year, it's kind of a reset psychologically where people are like, oh, wait, account values can go down month to month, week to week, etc. So that's just something to really keep in mind as an investor is, staying buoyant. And it's interesting. A guy that I golf with is working on that too. And his golf game is don't let the highs get too high and don't let the lows get too low. And really, it's from a Bruce Lee speech or talk or interview that he did, just mind like water and staying buoyant in your mind as you go through your investing career, essentially. So not that being pessimistic is bad or that being optimistic is bad, right? And that's, like I said, the theme for the entire year is going to be the art and the science of financial planning. And there's a balance, right? You don't want to be super hyper optimistic and you don't want to be necessarily a total doomsdayer that the world's going to end. It's not healthy. So just thinking about, again, why, right? Why do people treat optimistic news like it's nothing and treat pessimistic news like it's everything? And a lot of it is, it could be instinctual. So if we add on to that loss aversion feeling, right? Again, that a loss feels 2 to 4 times worse than a gain feels good. It's interesting to think about because, again, it affects everyone. In a recent episode that I did, I was talking about how, the COVID mindset shift, right? Like that affected everyone in some specific way to them, whereas a lot of other like life-changing things might only affect one person, or they might affect just a smaller group of people. So in the Psychology of Money book here, they make the analogy to weather, and they say a hurricane barreling down on Florida poses no direct risk to 92% of Americans. However, in terms of money, a recession barreling down on an economy could impact every single person, so they pay attention. And that's so analogous to COVID, right? And that episode, I can't remember which episode, it might have been episode number 2 of this season, just thinking about that and, and trying to come up with ways to justify those bad thoughts, right? Are they, what are investors worried about? They're worried about Russia, Ukraine. They're worried about the Fed. They're worried about politics. What's going to be the next shoe to drop? And so those narratives inside of people's heads, they are logical. They seem logical, but in reality, what we've seen over the course of time is that, the most successful companies and the smartest people working at those companies grow the economy and grow the markets over time. So that's one, right? Again, that loss aversion, that a loss feels worse than a gain feels good. That's the basic summary there. The other part of it is just how economists might extrapolate different data. So the example here in the book was talking about, again, a relevant topic today is talking about oil production. And, In 2008, there was an environmentalist that wrote by 2030, China would need 98 million barrels of oil today, and the world was only producing 85 million barrels per day at that time. So after that was said, oil prices went up. I think that's our nearest and closest remembrance of when gas was, $4 or more per gallon, like it is as it sits today. And it just sparked a huge surge of fracking and drilling and new technology and things like that. And it was really interesting, right? So fast forward to 2019, and oil production was now over 100 barrels per day. So it was 20% above that high mark that economists or environmentalists said was impossible. So extrapolating data, it doesn't think about, or it doesn't account for the world's ability to adapt. And that's really key because, we've seen this with COVID, right? How much the world adapts to things and figures out solutions. And there was a tweet that I saved. I'll have to see if I can find it, but that just talked about what companies were started during recessionary periods. And there's a lot of the best companies in the world that were started during those times. And it's important to think about, desperate times, generally have the best innovation. And so I think that's just really key to think about, is all the economic data that comes out all the time. It's I don't want to say nonsense. It's important, but it's too tough to, predict. And people think that they can predict the market. People think that they can predict what's going to happen in the economy. And it doesn't necessarily pan out like that, because the data is so hard to extrapolate, because there's so many external variables that go into account, that need to be accounted for, that we might not even know. So that's the second one, is just thinking about different data. And, data can be skewed in any direction. So that's the second point I'd make there. The third point that I'd make, that's also in this book, is it talks about progress versus setbacks. And there's a common adage in investing where they say you take the escalator up and the elevator down. And that might be what it feels like. So it's interesting. The quote here, it just says, progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too quickly to ignore. And the story here, they go back to talking about airplanes. And in 1889, the Detroit Free Press wrote that basically airplanes appear impossible because they said, and I quote this, "The smallest possible weight of a flying machine with the necessary fuel and engineer could not be less than 300 or 400 pounds. But there is a low limit of weight, certainly not much beyond 50 pounds, beyond which it is impossible for an animal to fly. Nature has reached this limit with her utmost effort and has failed to pass it." Basically saying that, that's the end of the quote there, but basically saying, if nature can't, if nothing in nature that's basically 50 pounds or more can fly, what makes you think that we're going to be able to fly 1,000 pounds, thousands of pounds of, airplanes essentially? So it's really interesting. And it talks a little bit about Orville and Wilbur Wright here and the inventions that they did. And it just talks about the first of all, the printing press, but then moving into airplanes and just how they did it. And so let me see here if I can find the talk here about what happens. Obviously, we know what happens since we have planes today, but planes, started wars, ended wars, everything. So they were first seen as a military weapon, and then they were seen as a rich person's toy, And then, in 1909, the Washington Post said that there's never going to be such a thing as commercial aerial freighters because freight is too heavy, right? Back to that weight argument. So it was really interesting, especially since, in 1909, after, 5 months after that article came out, the first cargo plane took off. So American innovation and just innovation in general is never going to stop. And that's what's so cool about, leaning more toward that optimistic side is that, it might be tougher to create a narrative, but that's ends up what happens in reality. So there's a little piece from the book here. It's easier to create a narrative around pessimism because the stories tend to be fresher, more recent. Optimistic narratives require looking at a long stretch of history and developments which people tend to forget and take more effort to piece together. So it's really interesting, right, to think about, there's so many analogies to this, but, one could be slow and steady, turtle in the hare, right? I mean, it's just slow and steady wins the race, and that's what people don't want to wait for. Again, that goes against human nature. Another piece here from this chapter is it talks about again what we're thinking about here is that progress, right? Progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too quickly to ignore. So thinking about heart disease, right? They say the age-adjusted death rate per capita from heart disease has declined more than 70% since 1965. And that's according to the National Institute of Health. A 70% decline in heart disease death is enough to save something like 500,000 Americans per year. So it says, picture the population of Atlanta saved every single year. But since that progress happens so slowly, it captures less attention than the quick, sudden losses like terrorism, plane crashes, and natural disasters. And that's just so true. And that's part of just news, right? What makes the news? It's just quick, bad, nothing necessarily great. So this says the short sting of pessimism prevails while the powerful pull of optimism goes unnoticed. And then we make the analogy to investing. It says in investing, you must identify the price of success, volatility and loss amid the backdrop of growth, and be willing to pay for it. And that is so key, right? And I just got off of a client meeting talking about this, where we're talking about risk per unit of return and making sure that a portfolio is constructed so that the investor can sleep well at night, knowing that over the long term, it's very, very important to stay optimistic and stay, buoyant, essentially. Don't let your highs get too high and your lows get too low. And pessimism is something to really at least be aware of and know that that will occur in your investing career. And it's really interesting, just thinking about different stories and how and why people think the way they do, especially when it comes to investing. So if we go back through and think about the top three, right, and the seduction of pessimism, like why do we feel how we do? The first one is that a loss in we want to make the analogies back to investing in money, is that a loss feels worse than a gain feels good. And so it makes things difficult to see even just a paper loss, let's say that, your bellwether was your end of your account balance last year, and now we started a new year and it's down, even though over the past 4 or 5 years you're up a lot. It makes things a little bit tough. The second part there is thinking about economic data and how that it can be skewed, and there's factors that we, one, can't control, and two, that we don't even know about, so we can't extrapolate the data correctly. So predicting the market is foolish, and predicting the economy is downright impossible. And again, thinking about pessimism versus optimism, it feels like it might be a logical takeaway if you're pessimistic, or a logical point, when really what happens in reality. That's key. And the final one is talking about progress versus setbacks. This is that escalator up, elevator down type of analogy in the market, where progress happens too slowly to notice and setbacks happen too quickly to ignore, right? If you're an investor, especially over the past few years, and you've been up double digits every single year or close to that, and now all of a sudden you've experienced 6, 7, 10% loss within the first 3 months of 2022, you're not ignoring that. And if we combo all of that in, you're not ignoring it, because again, the loss feels worse than the gain feels good, and you're going to all these different pundits and CNBC and whatever business show you watch, and it's just doom and gloom, right? A 1% gain in the market barely gets mentioned in the evening news, but a 1% loss, it's written in blood red letters. So you have to be very, very aware as an investor, and you have to be aware of your plan, and you have to have a plan, number one. And the way that you're going to want to invest is using that investment portfolio as a medium or a method to fund your plan, which is in line with your goals. I think that's a good place to stop. I apologize if I was rambling throughout this, but I would absolutely recommend reading The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. This is just an absolute great book. It's not super technical, and there's not necessarily a ton, you can read a chapter and then come back to another chapter a week later. It's available on, I have it on Kindle and Audible, and I even have a Kindle version where I think, you can read with the audio. So you can have someone reading it for you while your eyes follow the words. So it's a phenomenal read. I'm going to take a step back and just talk a little bit about, where we're at with current events and things. And I just wanted to, say that, when we come to times like this in the markets and in investing, and things seem doom and gloom. And again, I was looking through tweets and things from 2020, just thinking about, what was happening 2 years ago. It really just comes down to solidifying your plan. And even a suboptimal plan is better than nothing. But to make rash decisions and not have rules almost, or a set of rules that help guide you to make your financial decisions, to not have that can be super detrimental to your overall long-term net worth, your plan, and your portfolio. So having a plan in place and making sure that it is correct for you and you're invested appropriately so that you can sleep well at night, it becomes the top priority. I would say, financial things go hand in hand with health, right? 1A, 1B, your physical health and your financial health. So if there's any questions or anything, just please reach out and I'll be happy to answer them. But obviously thoughts are with everyone in Ukraine and all the things that are going on right now. And I just wanted to make that note, and I'll leave it here. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Please leave a 5-star review on your podcast of choice, or your method of choice that you're listening on, your platform. And I will go ahead and catch everyone next time. Thanks so much.